Hello and welcome to Statford Bridge, Chelsea by the numbers. Uh, Apparently, my name is wrong because I've been reliably informed in the comment section that it is Stamford Bridge, not Stratford Bridge, and that my pun is wrong because of that. Nonetheless, it feels a little bit late to make a name change, I think. So we'll stick with it. Uh, if you're liking the pods, give us a like, a subscribe, a retweet, whatever, all those sorts of things. A little bit of a longer episode today. By the time this goes out to you, it'll be 2025, which is cool. I'm recording this in 2024. And we're going to talk Ipswich, the loss to Ipswich. And we're at the halfway point now. We've played 19 league games under Enzo Maresca in the 2024-2025 season. Hitting the halfway point at exactly the year delineation is quite fun. But we're going to talk about kind of where things are at in the big picture. And then we'll talk a little bit about what I expect January to look like from there. But we'll start with Ipswich. I think this game is very weird because there's a couple things to talk about. The first is that the game is not that bad. Chelsea, losing to a newly promoted team away is bad. The result is bad. The performance was not that bad. Chelsea generated a whole lot of shots, and this isn't super game steady. Like, yes, Ipswich go up 1-0 early, so it's all game steady, but at the same time, like, it's not like Ipswich. I don't think they made tactical concessions to end up in a situation where this is what it was. And Chelsea were pretty terrible at 2-0. So I don't think there's like huge game state effects here. I think there's some, but not huge. Enzo Maresca said in his post-match press conference, he talked about it's a weird game because Chelsea create a whole load of chances in the first half, and the first 10 minutes of the second half, they don't score, they concede the second one, and then the wind goes out of their sails, which I think is an accurate depiction of the game. So kind of all in all, the performance is not that bad. 2xG to 1.6. Almost all of that is the penalty. 20 shots to 9. 4 big chances to 2. 36 to 15 box touches. Like, this, to me, is in a very different bucket than the Everton-Fulham bucket and second half of Brentford bucket. It might be a fatigue thing. Enzo Maresca talked about like how the team wins all the games at the beginning of December. By the end of December, the results start to drop off. You play 9 games in 30 days. I mean, maybe that is a fatigue thing. It's certainly possible. Chelsea were quite good until João Felix went off. And after João Felix went off, were very poor. They were very unable to generate shots from the 55th minute onwards. Of Chelsea's 2xG, they created something like 1.6 of it in the first 55 minutes of the game. And I mean, not to get in the weeds on João Felix, but like I think there was a lot of criticism of him that I thought was a little bit overboard. I don't think he was perfect, nor do I think he was particularly good, but I thought he was perfectly fine, and I thought he was very useful between lines in terms of getting Chelsea into the box through central areas and generating shots. Like if we look at his performance, which again was not crazy, the dude gets 4 shots in 55 minutes and he creates 1 shot. That's really, really awesome output. You compare that to Christopher Nkunku, who takes 1 shot, creates 2 in 65 minutes, but like the 1 shot he gets is kind of like fluky, just falls to him. I don't know. I think there is a lot of bleed in from the feeling about João Felix's transfer onto João Felix the player, in that he was a objectively terrible transfer. But I think as a player, he's mostly fine and should probably play a little bit more than he has. We see 4 subs in this game. Things are generally worse than the subs. Reece James returns to the bench. Romeo Lavia is still out, which I thought was odd. At the same time as all of me saying it's not that bad, I do think it's reasonably alarming how Chelsea performed in this game. Maybe alarming is too strong an adjective, but I think Chelsea were bad enough that I have question marks. Particularly at 2-0. I thought their inability to generate quality chances at 2-0 was really bad. Similarly, their inability to prevent transitions, not that Ipswich turned any of them into anything particularly dangerous. Like, people I think are going to over-index to the Omari Hutchinson goal, similarly to the I think it was McAtee chance that Leicester had in transition, where it's a kind of scary transition and the guy takes a great shot and this time it goes in. But I think what was more generally alarming is actually Liam Delap's play, in that Liam Delap ragdolled Tosin the whole game. He takes 5 shots, one of them's the penalty, but he was able to effectively get Ipswich out the whole game. And the key thing for this Chelsea team is, can you get to a point where you are able to turn the screw and sustain pressure and keep them in? And again, part of this is Axel Disasi had a terrible game. Part of this is I thought Tosin had a very poor game. Part of this is I don't think Levi Colwill had a very good game. I don't think Moises Caicedo had a very good game. Like, I don't think Chelsea played particularly well. But I think what was somewhat worrisome about this specific performance is that it actually felt like Chelsea couldn't do the things they wanted to do, rather than they didn't do the things they wanted to do. Where, like, I look at Everton and I look at the weather and I look at the lack of subs and the fatigue, and I'm like, I think this was Chelsea not doing the things they want to do, rather than being unable to do the things to do. Like, if you look at the Brentford game, for example, where for 65 minutes Chelsea are genuinely excellent, Brentford get nothing in transition, and then they die, and then they do get the transitions. I think this game, the whole game, Ipswich were much more dangerous in terms of gaining territory through Delap versus Tosin or Delap versus Colwill the whole game. I thought the 3 center backs that stayed did not manage him particularly well, and maybe that's a credit to him. I thought he looked intriguing. He's not somebody who's really stood out to me so far. I like his profile, but he strikes me as a little bit Southampton Broya, where like he's exciting because he's young, but he's not very productive. But I thought he was quite good in this game. But I think it's one of those things where Wesley Fofana has been really, really excellent, and that as a settled pair between him and Levi Colwill was working very well. And it's undeniable that Chelsea have been worse defensively since he's gone out. And now it's I hope he comes back soon. And Chelsea had good performances with him out. Like, again, I thought Brentford was quite good for most of the game. I think it's the combination of him and Benoit Badiashile, who is also a quite pacey recovery defender, compared to Tosin, who is absolutely not. I think those are 2 really, really big losses to have them both happen at the same time. And that, to me, is the story of this game. Is that Chelsea were not able to deny transition as readily as you would expect them to against Ipswich. Like, you compare to Ipswich's performance against Arsenal, where Ipswich take 9 shots against Chelsea. Against Arsenal, they take 3, and none of them are good. And they got no breaks the whole game, and Delap gets no joy from Gabriel and Saliba the whole game. And that, I think, is a very, very, very big difference. And again, I don't think anyone reasonable was subscribing to the title race thing. But, like, if you want to talk about differences, there's a difference. I think Levi Colwill is an excellent center back. I don't think he's as good as Saliba or maybe Gabriel yet, physically especially. And certainly none of his partners are at that level. Maybe Fofana when he's there. But I think that's a stretch. I think that's a pretty big stretch. And the other half of this is that for Chelsea to get the attacking output on the field that they want, where I was actually quite happy with the starting 11 choice here, I probably would have gone Josh over Disasi and then Disasi for Colwill. I was worried about Colwill injuries. I didn't mind having the two real pocket players and Enzo Fernandez high. I thought that part of it structurally worked. I think where it didn't work is that I thought Chelsea were kind of poor defensively. They didn't turn Ipswich over high nearly as much as they needed to. And so that's kind of where I come down, is that Chelsea weren't able to deny transitions enough to really turn the screw, so that your 36 to 15 box entries is like a 50 to 10 box entries game. Your field tilt goes from 65% to 80% or whatever it is, to really, really just like, no, we are playing the game in your third and the possessions are ending with shots on your net and nothing else. And at the same time, I don't think Chelsea did a great job of generating high quality chances out of the field tilt they did get once João Felix went off and once Christopher Nkunku went off. Once Cucurella went back into the pocket, it was just like and Sancho and Neto and Gusto, especially when Neto and Gusto came on, the game was over. Neto, I think, at this point is genuinely one of the worst transfers in the whole sporting director reign. And he's the same player he's always been. He doesn't score, create at tremendous volume, and I said it when we signed him that I don't think it was a good transfer. But this is where we are, that there's a whole lot of players who play and a whole lot of players who don't generate that much for you. I thought Christopher Nkunku was very poor in this game. Misses a very big chance off of a rebound, but other than that, didn't really contribute. At the same time, the best chance that didn't turn into a big chance is a transition through João Felix that he has a very easy slip to Nkunku for a 1v1 that he chooses to shoot. Again, if you're talking about teams who make the most, you play that slip and Nkunku scores, it's 1-1 going into halftime. The game feels very different. We'll see. But ultimately, I come down somewhere in between where I don't think this is quite a ball don't go in game. And we haven't even spoken about how scandalous the penalty is, because there's never a penalty. There's no contact that I can see, and I've watched it 100 times. But if we put that aside, I don't think this is a ball don't go in game. Like, I really don't think this is a sometimes ball don't go in game. But I also don't think this is nearly as bad. I think when you consider these three holiday matches in conjunction, so that being Everton, Fulham, and Ipswich, Chelsea take 1 point from 9 while playing pretty terribly across the three, right? Like, I would say it's definitely, in terms of consecutive, the stretch of 6 halves in a row that's the worst. If you include the Brentford one, it's 7. The second half of Brentford, it's 7 halves in a row that are pretty bad. Or somewhere between pretty bad and, like, at best okay. And at the same time, on the actual output both ways, the most likely take home is 4 or 5 points from those 3 games, whether it's you win Everton and draw this one, or win this one and draw Fulham, or whatever it is, or win 1 and draw 2. The most likely outcomes are 4 and 5 points. They're about equally likely. 1 point was as likely as 7 points. So, to give you an idea, like, there's plenty of worlds where Chelsea get away with this. I think over the course of the season, when you compare, we've talked about this a few times, that Chelsea have been fortunate with some other results. But nonetheless, I think people are perhaps overreacting a little bit to a bad spell, which happens to more or less everyone, unless you were an excellent title winner. Moving on to the bigger picture of the whole season, and we're at the 50% mark. We played 19 games. So, at 19 games, Chelsea are on 35 points. By the betting markets, they're still low 80 percentile for Champions League. By Opta's The Analyst, they are a like 81% chance at top four, and they're like a 95% chance at making the Champions League. If you include their 93% chance of making the Champions League, if you include fifth, which based on the Euro coefficients will almost certainly be the case. And some of it feels like kind of weird because Forest are up here and City are low, but I'm remain pretty not worried about top four in Champions, where I think Chelsea are comfortably better than the chasing teams, and they don't have a points gap to make up this year. Like last year, Chelsea missed Champions League by 6 points, being comfortably better than many of those teams. But at this point, Chelsea had 25 points. Right? If I was to look at the Premier League table, 25 points will put you like 9th this year or 10th, which is where they were last year. And they just couldn't make up the points, even with a huge winning run at the end. You start with it now. So you don't need the big winning run later. You just have to maintain. If Chelsea put up another 35 points to finish with 70, they will almost certainly come top four. They're on pace. If you match the same results as last year, they're on pace for 73. Let's see. We'll see how it goes. On the kind of comparison side, again, if we look at every match and we pull out the sexy spreadsheet, across the same 19 matches as last year, and again, Chelsea got to play some of these at the end of the year where they didn't mean anything, some did, across 20 games, the context doesn't, it all sort of evens out. If you take penalties out, which has been a big swing, this year at the 19 game mark, Chelsea are minus 1.5 XGD on penalties. We've conceded 5 and we've won 3, and they're about 0.75, so you're minus 1.5 expected goal difference on penalties. Last year, Chelsea were plus 5 or plus 6 penalties at this point. Now, some people will say that's a style thing, that Chelsea are generating less than dangerous box entries. Like, you can't just not count penalties because they did happen. Most of the literature is pretty supportive that penalty wins are quite not repeatable. It's mostly just how much time you spend in the box. There's a handful of players that's not true. Jamie Vardy, Lionel Messi, Kylian Mbappe. There's a few players who that's not true. Raheem Sterling has historically won quite a few penalties. But Raheem Sterling, when you normalize per box touch, he comes down to like very normal. I think that's just random noise. And I think Chelsea are perhaps a little bit unlucky given how much attacking they do. Like if this swings in the second half of the season, like if you look at the penalties they've conceded, like the Jorgensen penalty is very unlucky to concede. They concede they win 2 penalties in the same game against Spurs. Like I think if you told me Chelsea finished the season +2 on penalties, so they go +4 on penalties in the back half of the season, I'd say okay, whatever. But I think like winning 11 penalties as Chelsea did last year is very rare and unlikely. So taking penalties out of it, in the same 19 fixtures last year, Chelsea were plus 0.15 non-penalty expected goal difference, minus 0.1 goal difference. So I guess against the 19 games, they were a minus 2 goal difference without penalties. They were a plus 2 goal difference with penalties. On expected goal difference, they're a plus 3 expected goal difference without penalties across those 19 games. This year, Chelsea are plus 0.7. They're like a plus 12 on expected goal difference across that same run. They're plus 0.8 on goal difference. They're like plus 16 or plus 15 on goal difference, which is really nice. The XG is sizably up from last year, 1.5 to 1.9. And what I find interesting about the XG being up 1.5 to 1.9, one, a lot of it's Southampton, which is fine. There's the Spurs game against 9 men the other way, so like I'm not gonna throw it out. What's interesting to me about the XG being up so much is that Chelsea were chasing to win a lot of these games last year. And so you would think that there would be game state effects where, okay, you're like losing to Forest and you're losing to Villa and you're losing to Everton or whoever. Like, can you really, really turn the screws and generate a whole bunch of XG because you're losing? And this year, Chelsea are winning and their XG is up. And they're playing a lot of these games from the lead, which I find particularly interesting. On the XGA front, it's down a little bit, 1.37 down to 1.24. The gap between these two was much larger previously. The non-Wesley Fofana games, so everything after Villa, have been pretty rough. Southampton, Spurs, Brentford, Everton, and Fulham. And the Ipswich game is kind of whatever when you take out the penalty. It's been like pretty not great across the board since Fofana has gone out. But comparatively, the first 15 games defensively were really, really good. So these things kind of come out in the wash. Shot volume is up 3 shots. Shots against, they're down 2.5 shots. Like if you told me you're going to get 6 free shots a game, like that's the whole difference. That's the whole difference in XG between last season and this season. And so if there's anything I look at as like a big positive, it's that the shot difference is way up. Being a +5 shot difference team is huge. It's starting every game 1-0 basically. Or starting every game plus 0.5. So that to me is a really, really, really big positive. We've seen no games below 10 shots this year, which is awesome. And the two we've seen at 10 shots are City, the first game of the season when things were clearly disrupted, and Bournemouth, who've been one of the best defensive teams in the league. But other than that, we've seen no single-digit shot games. And last year, think about how many we had. 8, 7, 4, 6, 8. Like, we had a lot of them. A lot of low shot volume games. So I think that has been particularly positive. At the same time, we've done a much better job of denying opposition shots, which is very difficult to do defensively. So that is interesting kind of as a whole. And then on the box touch side, we go from a +1.5 team to a +10 team on box touches, generating significantly more field tilt. And again, I know we're in the middle of a bad run where you take 1 point from 9, and there's a lot of stress and a lot of angst about that because it was an easy holiday schedule. And I flagged it. I said it was a very easy holiday schedule, and it was a real chance to put a whole lot of points on the board. Like, there's a world Chelsea have 35 points. There's a world where Chelsea have 43 points. And if you're looking at kind of the Premier League table, imagine if Chelsea had 43 points, how good you'd feel about everything. And I get it, but they didn't. And so I think there's a lot of real focus on those 3. And maybe it's a trend. Maybe it's like, again, I've talked to death about how Maresca didn't fall apart in the second season. They just got a little bit unlucky. And maybe this is what's happening again. Maybe Chelsea are falling apart. I don't know. There was like a 5-game-ish blip where like their numbers did drop, but they weren't bad. Maybe that's what this is. I don't know. Maybe it's fatigue. I don't know. I tweeted a pretty crazy stat when I was looking at the game state and the time stuff. Before December, Chelsea were plus 0.41 XG per 90. This is non-penalty, all game states, 11v11. Chelsea were plus 0.41 XG per 90 in the first half, plus 0.62 XG per 90 in second halves. We were killing teams in second halves. It was quite a bit higher than this too. Since December, so the 9 games played in December, or I guess the 5 league games or whatever it is, 0.95 XG per 90 in first halves, minus 0.57 XG per 90 in second halves. That's just like a totally brutal swing. And to go from being really good in second halves to being really bad in second halves, all of a sudden when the fixture gets congested, when the fixture schedule gets congested, that screams fatigue to me. And given Chelsea have Conference League and the league congestion is basically done from here. I think there's 2 more midweeks the rest of the way. I mean, it's not something I'm deeply worried about. I suspect Chelsea will win against Palace, and I suspect they'll win against Morecambe, and we'll go from there. Some other fun ones to consider comparing last year to this year and whether we've made progress and blah, 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 blah. In even game states, a lot better. Losing, better. Winning, better. For the audio-only listeners, we're up about a third of expected goal in even game states. It's pretty good. Chelsea have been one of the better teams in the league at even game states. We're almost twice as good in losing game states, so we're chasing games better, and we're losing one. In winning game states, we're up a little bit. Not that much, but a little bit. In first halves from 0.42 to 0.63, and second halves from 0.44 to 0.65. These, I think, are the whole season, and these are just the first half of the season, because I was curious. And what I thought was really interesting is I suspected that there was I suspected that Maresca is less focused on conditioning than Pochettino is, and we would see more fitness fall-offs than we have. And so I thought it was very interesting that the difference between first and second halves is exactly the same when you average out to the whole season. Exactly the same between the two, which I thought was very, very fascinating when you take penalties out of it. When we compare to, again, some other kind of headline metrics, 10 points better on points, a little bit worse on X points. There's some solid game state things in here, particularly for this season, Chelsea. But again, 34 and 32 is about the same. The goal difference is much better. The non-penalty expected goal difference is a little bit better. Again, this difference is almost entirely penalties. Non-penalty XG is up. Non-penalty XGA is down a little bit. Is up a little bit, which is worse. Shots for, way up. Shots against, way down. Box touches up. Box touches against, way down. The conditional formatting on that one is wrong. The PPDA is a little bit higher than last year, so Chelsea are a little bit less pressy than last year in the first half of the season. But that's not bad. And Chelsea are being pressed more than they were last year. We don't have how many turnovers Chelsea are generating in their own third compared to last year. Mark Stats didn't record that last year. But the build-up completion numbers are a little bit higher. It's 87.3 versus 87.1 for this year. Excuse me. But Chelsea are being pressed a little bit more. I think this is more of a league-wide trend that there's more teams pressing this. Expected threat difference is up. Nicely, the early possession losses have come down. They were 28, 29, 30 the first couple games of the season, and now it's back down to about 0. So Chelsea are getting as good as they give in the pressing department, which is pretty good given the not adept defensive personnel in the attacking lines. Not exactly a very gifted defensively group of attackers that Chelsea have. And then the field tilt is up from 52, which is reflected a lot in the shot numbers and the box touch numbers. And so when I take a step back and I look at the whole season worth of metrics, so far, if you didn't tell me any results, you didn't tell me how this game went, you didn't tell me how that game went, you just gave me this. You said you have this many points, you have this stat profile, I think every single person would be like, all right, cool. We've taken a solid step forward from last year. I'm cool with this. I'm fine with this. This is great. How did this game go? I'm curious. Did we beat Spurs? Yes. Great. Cheers. I think when you take a step back, all of those things are fine, on progress. I don't think they're rant and rave about. I think if Chelsea had 43 points at the halfway point, I'd say, okay, this is really impressive. I don't think it's rant and rave about. I think it's like solid progress. Nothing to toot your own horn, nothing to write athletic long reads about and talk about how good you are. But it's progress. Now, the second half of that, which will lead into our discussion of January transfers, is it enough progress for all the business you've done? To me, the answer to that question is almost certainly not. I think if you look at this summer, I went into the summer saying, hey, I want Chelsea to do not very much business at all. I want to keep kind of all the same dudes. I want to buy a backup striker, like a proper bruiser type backup striker. And that's it. I want to play the healthy guys who were not healthy last year more. And I just want to keep the group we've got and see what they are with a coach that I think has ideas more amenable to the talents of this group in terms of keeping the ball a little bit more, but whatever. So you put all those things together. That's what I expected to do. And if that's what Chelsea had done, mostly run it back, I'd be like, okay, this is great progress. You can be super happy with this. That's what Chelsea did. They spent 120 million pounds on Neto, Sancho, if you include Sancho's fee now, and João Felix. They bought another goalkeeper. They brought Tosin in on a free to move Chalobah out. I don't think Tosin is better than Chalobah. Like, they bring Guiu in to move Broja out. That's fine. I don't really care about that. I don't know. I just look at, they bring Vega in to banish Chilwell. I just don't know. I don't see the point of spending so much money to make the progress you probably would have made anyways. Like, if you look at Chelsea's performance this year versus last year, and you say, okay, instead of Jadon Sancho, and Sancho has been better than expected, but instead of Sancho and Neto, you have Mudryk and Sterling. How much better or worse are you? And, like, to me, I don't think the answer is obviously worse. Like, I actually think it's about the same. You look at Felix. Okay, you keep Conor Gallagher or you have João Felix. I mean, given their contributions in the league, like, you're maybe a little bit better off if Conor Gallagher stays. Like, I don't see the comparative value there. And I think at some point you have to come to the conversation of, how does this team go from slow, steady, sustainable progress, which is what this year is, absolutely no doubts in my head that this is progress. But you look at the group that's there and the coach that's there, and you say, how does this team go from, let's say Chelsea finished this season with 75 points. How does this team go from 75 points to 87 points, another 12-point improvement, or to 90 points, a 15-point improvement? How does this team do it? And to me, maybe you're like, well, Esteval hits a 90th percentile development outcome and he ends up as good as everyone thinks he's going to be, and that answers a lot of questions for you because he's a 15 goal, 15 assist guy. Maybe. He's certainly not going to be that year one. Maybe Reece James gets permanently fit, or Lavia hits a development home run, or Wesley Fofana never gets injured again, or Palmer goes from being a 0.8 goal assist a game guy to a 1+ goal assist a game guy, or Jackson becomes Holland, like scores 30 goals, or Harry Kane scores 30 goals every single season. Like, sure, all of these things could happen, but none of them are something you're going to be sitting here planning for. And so you very quickly get to a point, well, okay, you have to move some of the squad you have and bring in new players. But when you've already spent so much money and brought in so many players, well, what are we doing here? If these players aren't good enough now, so your Sanchos and your Netos and your Tosins and your Gustos and your Desassis and whoever, if they're not good enough now, and all of the players I just named are all in their mid-20s, and Joao Felix and whatever are all in their mid-20s, and are not going to improve enough to get you to a title, why did you get them? So I think the tone that I have said for a very long time is that I am eager to watch and excited about and enjoy the on-field product. I like watching this team for the most part. The players are good, but they're just good. But I am regularly worried about the off-field part. I do not have much faith in the recruitment apparatus to adequately identify the holes that this has. And so we go into the January portion of this discussion. What should Chelsea do in January? And I come to the place of do literally nothing but bring back Andre Santos. And there's two halves of this. So if we look at total minutes played, I think there's a whole bunch of guys that you probably want to move. I think Dewsbury Hall is probably got to go. I think you want to get off his wages. I don't think he's useful to your squad. Get rid. Carney Chukwuemeka, as much as I don't rate him, has much more of a runway to potentially being impactful for you. One, because he's 21 and not 26. And two, because you also need to play him because in his senior career, he has not played a total of 1,000 minutes. And so you can imagine getting him another 6 Conference League 90s would be pretty huge for him. And if that means you get a better sale in the summer, or he turns into something useful for you, or whatever it is, that feels much more realistic than like Dewsbury Hall, the guy who's clearly shown that he's not at the level, finds a way to be at the level. Like, I just don't see that happening for you. So that's number one. Two, Cesare Casadei goes. Again, he's not really playing other than Conference League games. Sounds like that is probably going to happen. I don't think you're doing anything with the main group. Unless some deal you cannot believe comes available, which I cannot imagine happening. Like, maybe you get a backup striker, but I don't see that happening. And so you get to a point where, like, really the only one is, can we get a defensive midfielder who can spell you when Romeo Lavia can't play all the time because he's injured a lot. And so you don't have to run Caicedo and Enzo into the ground, which is kind of happening a little bit right now. I thought Enzo was quite good on the weekend, and I thought they were both brutal against Fulham, and Caicedo was pretty poor against Ipswich. So you end up in this place where, like, wow, it sure would be really nice to have a midfield option to come on at 60 every single game for one of them. And when I think about that, the question becomes, okay, do you buy somebody? With Andre Santos there, the answer to that is certainly not. And then the second question is it Andre or is it Leslie? And I think I'm much lower than on Leslie Ugochukwu than other people are. I think the conversation around Leslie is around a player that he is not. The things that Leslie does well are like half turn, pass the ball forward, but not from center backs. It's like as an 8. And I think the way Chelsea are set up, like there's not a whole lot for that role. Leslie has historically been a much lower ball winning player than you would think. Like if we pull up his France data from before he came to Chelsea, as a defensive player, like he was not huge. Like he's like 1.2 tackles. Sorry, yeah, like 1.6 tackles a game attempted. Like that's not a lot. Like 2.5 is not a lot. At Southampton this year, 2.2 is not a lot. Interceptions, like, okay, not bad, but like this is not a huge ball winner. You compare it to Moises Caicedo, who I think has like 300 defensive actions in 19 games or something, based on some Opta stat I saw. Like, Leslie is not the defensive anchor who's going to come in and solidify things for you. I also think he's just significantly worse than Andre Santos is right now. And so, like, putting that aside of, okay, you would rather take Andre than Leslie, which I think most people would agree with, the question then becomes, well, is it better for Andre's development to stay in France? And so the place that I get to is this. Strasbourg are probably not going to get relegated. I know there's like a lot of like, oh, if you take Andre, they're going to get relegated. I don't think that's true. But I look at it this way. The French league has another 19 games to play, another half season to play. If Andre Santos plays the same proportion of minutes that he's played now, about 75%, he's going to get another 1,400 minutes for Strasbourg. Is it more valuable for Andre Santos to play 1,400 more minutes at Strasbourg, or for him to play right now, say, 800 minutes between Conference League and Cups, guaranteed 800 minutes every single time, and then see what he gets in the Premier League of, can he get 30 minutes as a sub pretty consistently? Can he get 30 minutes? Can he get a start when we have the odd midweeks? And now, like, if you look, there's 2 midweeks left. He gets 30 minutes as a sub on average, every 2 weeks. Like, all of a sudden, you're talking about he's playing 1,000 minutes or 1,100 minutes at Chelsea anyways. And it's like, well, what's better? The 1,100 at Chelsea or the 1,400 at Strasbourg? And I think when we're talking about long-term stuff, I think with the loanees, no matter where you are, there can be a bit of an out of sight, out of mind thing to it. And I personally would prefer it to be at Chelsea. And yes, the level of Conference League is on average going to be lower, but in the knockout rounds, it's not that bad. It's going to be solid Belgian teams, and like the most likely round of 16 opponent Chelsea have are like Real Betis and Heidenheim, which is as good as games he's going to get in Liga. So I think for all of January, that's what I would do. Is I would just bring back Andre Santos. I would loan or sell Kieran Disbury-Hall. It'll be a loan. You won't be able to sell him now. I would sell Cesare Cassidy. And if you can get off Chilwell's wages, great. I suspect you will not be able to. But that's where I would mostly leave everything. I think the other kind of looming specter of all of this is what happens with Mudryk and his pending ban. If that gets confirmed as a multi-year suspension, I suspect you will see Chelsea try to move off of his contract for cause in a very Adrian Mutu way. But we'll see. Anyways, that's all for me. We'll be back after Palace on Sunday. Happy New Year to you and your families. Thank you all for listening. And as always, enjoy the soccer.